Hi there, Randi Green here, part 2. So, when it comes to actual historical facts, even though archaeology and all sorts of sciences claims that they have a pretty good indication of when it is, it's still a pretty good indication due to carbon dating that goes with the level of radiation that are within different layers of our reality. And when it comes to rocks and stones, they are notoriously difficult to date. So it rests upon our collective understanding of our joint history. And if that's wrong, well, then the dating will be wrong as well. Point being, instead of me trying to, sorry about that, I had to make a little gap because I really needed to cough. So instead of me trying to claim that I know the historical truth, which I don't, because time is an illusion, as we know, time is kind of an extended version of the density of the molecules and energetic particles our reality is made of. So time does not exist, which we know. But we can have this kind of, when we look at the timeline of what, similar like the clock, you're looking at your watch every day saying, oh, the time is this and this. And then you know you can put your clock away. Then you can have an estimate around, is it morning, midday, noon, afternoon, or evening? And you kind of have a good understanding what it is just by the sensing of the sun and how the energies are and the amount of light and whatnot. And that's the same when we talk about periods, time periods. We kind of have an estimate. When we remote view into earlier stages of our civilization, we can look at the surroundings and then we have a good feel within what time frame. So we're working with time frames more than actual years. So time frames. Okay, so back to the big conundrum of the circles around these teachers. So we have the two ending people that came into this reality field to end their lineage, their affiliation with the colonial forces, and their affiliation with anything that they had got themselves into trouble with, let me put it that way, by collaborating with these forces, and in that to redeem themselves, done what we call the giving over. And I know this sounds very harsh and cynical, but this is my perception of it, and this is due to the experiences I have had with the different extraterrestrial groups. And you can again say, Randi, that's not true. That's what they have made you believe, and that's not how it actually is. And that could very well be, just so keep that in mind. But this is my interpretation, my experiences, and what I have concluded from the enormous amount of experiences I have with different extraterrestrial groups. And it's like when you're out in society, you have one person that tells you something, you say, yeah, that could be made up. But then you meet another person that says the same, or you meet another person that says the same, and yet another, and another, and another. Then you have 100 people that are saying the same. Then you have to think, are they either all deluded, or are they under the same program, or are they part of a specific factions that want to see the same? So you go through all of these different steps of what this knowledge actually could be. And then eventually you say, well, as always is with these different groups, 80% of it is probably more or less distorted, because that is what it is, including if I asked you to talk about your childhood or your memories. But 20% of it might actually be close to the truth. Close to the truth. Nobody has the real access to the truth, because the truth is always what is suitable for our energy system, so that we can align deeper and deeper with our core functionality of who and what we originally were when we entered into this system. And I'm deliberately not saying the core self, because that would be so easy. But you understand that self is a construction as well. That's part of this current form. And in the previous versions of ourselves, we didn't have a self as we are having it now. And that's why when you work on the dimensional levels, the concept of self fades away, which is why the higher self is part of the astral plane. Whereas when you go to the other versions of who and what you are, you go into the different types of operating modalities that are suitable for that type of energy and consciousness that you currently are in contact with, as an intermediate or an interface system that is functional in that specific moment with that specific type of energy, in that specific task, in that specific type of timeline. And then there will be tailored a kind of a coherent perception field that allows you to perceive and interact with reality according to the principle and rules of engagement of that timeline and that type of reality field. And that becomes your sense of being a being. So instead of saying a self, we could say a being that is perceiving, interacting, experiencing, and developing different types of consciousness units within that type of reality that we're currently a part of. And that's something completely different. So we have now erased, when we go into the fourth dimension beyond, there's no time. There are time frames, time periods, timelines. These are technically streams of energy. That becomes important because there is a saying that you have a stream entry when we talk about getting to the higher levels of the jhanas, where you go beyond the astral dense layers and go into the more subtle layers. You step into the stream. And that's the path of liberation, where you begin to understand how timelines, aka code streams, actually work. You step onto it, and then it becomes a highway of information that you can investigate and become part of and get focused attention to, so that you can figure out how to clear your connection points to these timelines. And that's what is, in the Buddhist terminology, in my perception, the original understanding of that was what we call cessation. That is, disconnecting for everything that gets you entangled in this reality. Timelines and time frames and different types of aspects of consciousness and energy configurations that ties you to the cycles of the past, aka karma. Okay, so this is me translating these into these systems, because when I look at again, for me, whenever I get presented the suttas, I'm just kind of, my mind just shuts down right away, because they have nothing to do with the original teachings. And when it comes to the Gospels and the mythology around the character Jesus, my mind does the same thing. I might as well read a science fiction book. There are traces of truth in it, but it's a story. Could we just please get that established? The sutras, whatever is made of thousands of pages around the Buddha, are stories written down by his followers. It's not written down by the Buddha himself. Then we can discuss how well they remembered what he said and what he actually said out there. So again, there's another distinction, as we're also seeing in the stories around Jesus. There is some information that are given to the masses. That's the people that gathers around him. There is certain information that are given to the students. These are the inner ring. So we have the different rings around the avatar. Sorry for me being a little bit condescending here, but that's because I'm so tired of people thinking that just because they read a text where this is supposedly put the words into the mouth of the character that's in the story, doesn't mean it's the truth. So I would like a little bit scientific, investigative mind here, and put it all and say these are very interesting stories, and they do show profound key words and points towards some of the modalities and the teachings that the students have been trying to describe in these suttas and these stories, the same as with what we find in the Gospels. They do carry weight when we talk about ethics, morality, right behavior, and some of the more fundamental principles of getting onto the path. These stories are made for the ones that need to get onto the path. Once you get onto the path, which is stream entry, that means you go onto the code streams and no longer are cloaked in the astral and mental distortion fields, but get onto the real knowledge of what true science of the consciousness potentials actually are, however interpreted in whatever reality you're a part of, because history has changed our minds, so to speak. Not that history has changed it, but throughout history we have had different modalities of mind and different modalities of emotions, and hence we have interpreted our reality and what we were taught differently, all according to which time frame we existed within. Now, this is very complex, but this is super important. Translating into more simplistic terminology, whoever you were in a past life, whatever program you were under, how severely controlled you were on your perception levels, whether you were put into the configuration of a worshipper or a configuration of a scientist, or a configuration of an investigative mind, or a configuration of something else, will determine how you have perceived that level of information that was given to you. Just look at you today, how you perceive things. How much is actually in alignment with what I say, and how much is in alignment with what you believe it to be. Probably mostly the latter. And the same goes with these teachings. And people who are studying these texts on a scholastic, that means a university professional professor level, to figure out what was the real sayings, they know this. And that's what we get taught when we go to university and learn to study text material of the past. We understand the cultural settings, we understand the traps we can go into, we understand what's called the projection mode, that we're trying to project what we are today back to the past, which you can't. You need to understand what was the civilization at the time, what kind of mindset did they have, how well versed were they in actual critical thinking, as we have now very little. They were good to repeat what they were taught. The way people were taught things back then were as a repeat. You see that in the suttas. You have this repeat again and again and again, almost like a mantra, which there is a reason for as well. And then you have, when we go to the 500 years later, in a different era, in the era of Judea, then you have a different perception of language. You have a different perception of how things were taught, because you had there got the scripture, which they did also have back in India and in these areas. But as always, the scripture was amongst the priesthoods, the ones that were allowed to do scribes, a priesthood at that manner. They were part of what we call specific lineages that were engineered, so to speak, to do that under either the kings or under the temples. Whereas when you go to Judea, you had the Roman culture that were influencing there, and they had taken the written word, so to speak, as part of a trade system. So there were commoners that were scribes. And that's where the difference comes in between the text material from the Buddha that was later on, of course, via the monks. But when we talk about the now I forgot, the Vedas and all of these very sacred, not Pali, but Sanskrit written text material that were written by people that were part of the cult, the temple cult. So these are priestly scriptures. Compared to some of the Gospels, they were written by commoners or by scribes that were commoners. The letters of Paul is not written by Paul himself, because he couldn't write, but he dictated it to a scribe that was a commoner that was used for either trade or for letters between the kings or whatever these things were that were going on at the time. So that's the difference as I see it, and I can't claim that there are several scholars that back this up, but this is how I see it when I look at things psychic energetically, because that's what I am doing. I'm not looking into some textbook of some professor this or that who have claimed this or that, because for me, the scientific paradigm, and this is kind of called what's peer reviewed, and I understand this gives it credibility because so and so many says it, but there's also this huge limitation into, you're only allowed to talk within this paradigm. Everything that falls beyond that is gibberish. So clearly I'm not part of the scientific paradigm, but I am pleased that I got through my bachelor degree, which was a hassle and absolutely unpleasant energetically, emotionally, and mentally on all levels, and not anything I would do again because of the limitations and the way that things works in universities. But I completed, and I'm proud of my completion, because that gives the understanding, for me at least, I can say I did it. So that's always cool to have that you have completed something, and in that way you have withstand it and got from it what I felt was necessary. For me, doing that got me the scientific method, which is super important for a high clairvoyant being like me. And secondly, it taught me history and the way to work with text material that has been super helpful for me in all of this material we have out there, to really go in and peel away the layers and not projecting my perception onto it, because that's what most people do. If you have anyone who just goes on and read the text, I did the same. You read it and then you read it from who and what you are today and interpret it from who and what you are today. And that's why it's called with these texts that they are timeless. Whoever looks into it can always project some meaning and purpose into it. And they're written deliberately that way, but they are written on the basis of distortion. So that means you're just adding more distortion to your own field when you are leaning on these ancient teachings. So how did they become distortions? Back to the rings. We have now established the key, the person that is the avatar, character Jesus, character Buddha. They had an inner circle of disciples around them that were the core students. The core students had an understanding of the avatar as a person, but also as, I would not call it a higher order being, because that would elevate them up to something they are not, but a person, a being that was here as a representative of a lineage, backed up by a faction, and thus had access to levels of reality as part of the left-wing brotherhoods that most did not have access to, hence having a profound insight and knowledge into reality. We have had smaller teachers. We could say that the lineages behind the Buddha, again, he was a Raja, he was born into a Raja, that's left wing. You don't get power in this world if you're right wing. If you're right wing, you have semi-power. You don't really have true power. So you're not born into a king lineage. So that indicates the left wing. And when you say, well, Randi, that's a claim. Yes, that's a claim. And it's unpleasant for people to think that their avatars actually are not the heroes they want them to be. That's the glamour. Peel it away. We're all just human beings trying to struggle and figure out a way to get out of the mess that we're in. Mistakes were made. That's part of our history, including from the councils and whatever's going on here. We are talking about living life forms that are beings that make discerns and choices and go in and choose specific ways of existence. And that does not make them godlike. That just makes them living life forms that are figuring out how to use energy and consciousness correctly under the laws of the principles inside this reality. And the principles are 1, the first of many, 2, the correct balancing point, 3, the law of participation, 4, the law of reciprocity, 5, and I'm here working with it as a law because they tie into the rules of engagement and natural laws of energy, which is why I suppose suggest that you do the transition sciences and the template sciences, and there you will get again and again and again the principles and how they apply to our worldview and perception of reality. And then principle 5 is the true inner knowledge. Principle 6 is the true partnership. Principle 7 is the correct types of commitment. Principle 8, the correct use of energy. And principle 9, correct use of power. And principle 10, 11, and 12 goes with the higher levels of our consciousness potentials. So that's normally not needed inside this reality. So the first 9 principles are tied to the 3-9 pillar, of which defines reality. So all of these things are tied together. Okay, so that's where, again, when I look at things, and please bear in mind, this is my perception, and you're more than welcome to have it different. But we can all just share what we have experienced and how we perceive reality. And then perhaps at some point out of that tapestry of information, we can create a pattern where we begin to find the points where we align, and then we can find the points where we are totally dissimilar. And all of that is okay. That's diversity that leads to transformation and leads to different types of forces that allows for all civilizations to continue in some kind of progression on the streams, code streams. Okay, so we got that one. The next part of this, we now have the first group around each and one of these 2 avatars I'm here talking about. So that's the disciples. They know the person, they know the ups and the downs, and they know that person is just a person. But that person has access or an opened opened or access points to the other layers of what it means to be humans, and are here as the first of many, but also as the last of many, to exemplify and finalize and give over. So what is it that they are here to finalize? That's their own lineage, so that's the last of many. But they also become the first of many to show, I am here to finalize what was old of the past and cut loose from that, so I can be released from this reality field and no longer be under the enslavement procedure of rebirth. Hence the path of liberation. And that's the first of many. So it comes in as the last of many to end, complete, and finalize, and then seed in via the giving over something that potentially could be as the first of many. So the inner ring becomes the first of many. So the avatar, him or herself, is the last of many. But they give over for an inner ring that then becomes the first of many. But there is an obligation being the inner ring. And that is that the inner ring, once they get this information, is that they must discern what information belongs to the past, what can be applied to the present, like the whole Academy teachings, and what must be let go of so that a more prosperous future can be there. The teachings that are given are always given within a specific time frame. And that time frame typically goes with 5 rings, the most that follows the principles. The inner ring, the first principle 1, is the first of many or the last of many. The second ring is both the first of many, but also one that gives it to the next group. So they are the balancing point. The third ring is the law of participation. That's where, unfortunately, the worshippers begin to kick in. They are the third ring that receives the information from the second ring. Once the second ring no longer is there, it's then the third ring that will continue the teachings. That's typically where it gets written down by the worshippers that have heard some of it, but are already under a high degree of glamour and distortion. Hence it becomes religion. Then you have the third ring that teaches it to the fourth ring. The fourth ring are the ones that are just sucking it up like little kitten that's just getting milk. It's without any discernment. It's part of the temple culture. So that's where it really becomes a religion. And then you have the fifth ring where it must be evaporated, let go of, and then the true knowledge must rise again, giving grounds for what we could say the complete finalization of these teachings, where the ones that have been reborn and are being reborn with it as an inner knowledge can then look at it again, and then they can clear their connection points to the previous timelines of the other rings so that that information no longer is part of the collective. That's the true inner knowledge. That's where we understand with wisdom what to cling on to and what to let go of, and what to use if we have affiliation with the fourth ring. That's the fourth cycle as well, the reseeding, where we are to learn the compassionate teamwork within the tribe, or if we're part of the fifth ring, where we learn the inner knowledge and stand sovereign inward, and we have been and what we are now and what we can become, so that we can begin the journey of the higher principles. And that's principles 6, 7, and 8, as well as into bordering and completing in principle 9. Okay, so there are rules around this. There are laws regarding these teachings. So we could say that we are now officially entering into cycle 5, as well as leaving ring 4 within the old world order teachings of these 2 avatars. It's time to let it go. It is now so distorted. It has popped up as a religion. It has entered into cults. It has entered into temple culture. It has entered into worshipping. It has become the Buddha said. And once you begin to have that, it's same as if I want to say, oh, Randi said. No, that's a worshipper. That's not an independent thinking mind that has taken this to the level where all information must be let go of so that you can go into stream entry, so you connect to your own timelines. They're here to show us how to connect to our own timeline, our own consciousness potentials, our own higher order sciences, our own inner system of extreme, extended whatever type of information that is connected to your higher order template. So that's what these people were there for. And that's for me how this should be interpreted. And all of that has been distorted. So you now pay attention to that whenever you are looking at some kind of old teaching system. The questions are, is this information useful for the path that you're on now? What can you look into and derive from it that is in understanding with what you're looking for right now, so that you get closer to the consciousness potentials that you have as a living being? Don't fall into the trap of being part of the third ring, where you get so absorbed into the only thing you can see is that teaching system, and then that's the only true teaching system. Because then you fall easily into the fourth ring, where you become kind of the third ring already worshippers, but you get into the fourth ring where you have a temple culture. Then you become of all of these groups that are together worshipping this teaching system. And I'm sorry I'm saying worshipping, because I know if you ask any serious student of the material of the Buddha in the monasteries, they will say they are not worshippers, but their everyday life in the monastery, similar like the monasteries you have around Christianity, that's worshipping. It's worshipping. I'm sorry, but it's worshipping. You create a whole culture around the text of one person, and then you elevate that person to hold the truth. And that person's truth is what you abide to. And every time you begin, whether it's a class or it's a chant or it's whatever, then you go in and you affirm that you are hereby confirming that the teachings of the Buddha, the truth to the path of liberation, from where you can gain the true insights of who and what you are as a living being. That's worshipping. So for me, that's whatever we put out of mental words there, including like here, I'm doing mental words explaining my standpoint. So it's always just our different standpoints, and it's up to people to say, well, what do I resonate with most? But from this little thing that's now giving you an opposition to the worshippers and the old world order, what they try to put in to keep us in the fourth ring, because that's what the old world order is all about, to keep these old cycles going, even though they are at their finalization point. Now, the question is, have we then moved into the fifth ring with what's going on our planet today? And from where I'm standing, there is this interesting connection point between the third cycle and the fifth cycle. And there is a lot of people on this planet that are connected more to the third cycle than they are to the fifth cycle. The 3-5 configuration are often associated with what we call the 5-11 pillar, and they are highly prone to technology and revert to the older civilizations we had in the previous universal cycles that are associated with the third cycle. So that's where the understanding of progression stagnates and things go into distortion, as we have sort of seen it with the different rings. And with that comes all sorts of illusions and glamour and distortions from where supposedly the truth is hidden, like we're seeing in the world today in social media. Not that I'm saying that science has the facts, whatever. That's just another level of distortion. But there is pros and cons with everything. But what's going on right now, and people can claim what I'm saying here is distortion too, because it's psychic energetic. So we are in this mishmash of figuring out what is this world beyond the colonial programs that are collapsing. What is this world beyond the teaching systems that we've been given? What is this world beyond the sciences that we have been given? And what is this world, and who and are we as humanity in our thought processes and our discernment processes and in our search for what reality actually is, as we at the same time learn that there is no objective truth. There is no scientific truth. There is nothing we can rest our head upon, as it said in the Gospels, that actually say, now I got there. This is an ongoing process of energy and consciousness in a dance that leads to evolution, that leads to progression, or the opposite, devolution and regression. And it's a dance between these two poles, polarities of either progression or regression. And right now we are at the opposite, where we're going into regression. For those who are still in the awakening process and have not cleaned out their past, they will be sucked into these very, very tough mainstreams of regression and will be seeing that as the best way they can. They will go back into the worshipping and the ring 3, where they are no longer asking questions, but are just so happy to be part of a tribe, to be part of some kind of collective that gives them the foundation of what they are to believe in. And they are being drawn there now steadily, strongly, and we have seen it played out. And now with the president over there, then we have a whole continent that are now in that modality, which is unfortunate. So that leaves the rest of the world. We have the other side, we have China and Russia that are doing the same thing. So we are kind of a large group in the middle that needs to figure out, okay, we're the present. How do we then, in what ways and forms, do we then figure out, both those of you who are stuck over there or stuck on the other side of the pond or wherever you are on this planet, there are challenges for those of us who understands that the journey that we are now on has become very, very more complicated, and that demands new levels of awareness for us. And that's where I want to push the processes and the information on the Higher Order Psychic Energetic Institute. I don't know where it's going yet. It's a work in progress, because now we are again being pushed so far to what I call the left, as in the left-hand path, as we possibly can get inside our civilization. We have had these kingdom nobility people on top of the world governance before. And that dates back to some of the Niburian, Atlantean, whatever types of lineages. So just with that said, so again, for those of you who are over there, we could hopefully say that the next 4 years are just a cleanse out process. And that is what I want to talk about in the next podcast. Thank you.